After going through product analysis through the history of the Digimon card game, I felt that with the shock and release of products in this year for it, it would be appropriate to look at what would be ideal products for Bandai to consider moving forward. After all, while many players, myself included, have released videos like the worst set in the Digimon card game, undeniably, there are instances in which Bandai has been very successful. At times, I find content to be very negatively spun. And while true Bandai does put out a lot of products, admittedly, there are elements that I think are positive. Today's narrative of the video is going to look distinctly at one of three different types of products, in which Bandai has created for the Digimon card game. For the next couple of weeks, each video is going to be a standalone discussion on what Bandai has done well, and what they really haven't. By the end of it, as Bandai releases more surveys to the community for feedback on how they're doing, this will provide some additional elements to consider when you send them in. And as always, if you enjoy this type of content, do consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and hitting that notification bell for more future content. For the first video, I'm going to look at starter decks. And while true some of the earliest starter decks have little to no play at this point, the advanced starter decks have the most work put into them as a starting point for players to get into the card game. While I have not done a review yet over starter decks 18 and 19, these do feel like there's a much closer representation when it comes to what the starter decks look like 4 years later. But when you look at the Beelzemon and Double Typhoon starter decks, one thing that these decks excel at is not only having a cohesive strategy that builds upon the deck itself, but having some major reprints. Reprints are the one thing that is extremely lacking in the Digimon card game, and while having full-blown reprint sets was one way to tackle the solution, the release of reprints at times can be too slow. By introducing them into starter decks, true, this might increase the price of a starter deck, but it gives players a more feasible way to obtain cards. And because of this is largely my thought process when it comes to creating deck cores for new players in my local area. Now looking back at the first 3 starter decks, Red Gaia, for example, was advertised as a starter deck that was centered around Taikamiya and Agumon related cards. And the question, what would I do now if I were to make an advanced Red Gaia starter deck, and what kind of reprints would I have? Effectively, based on the description, it'd be appropriate to mirror many elements of the Beelzemon advanced starter deck, utilizing many Digimon with the same name based on the theme. In addition, I feel that starter decks should at least include 8 eggs total for players, because this allows players to have options to either go more aggressive or control. So starter deck 1 Koromon? Nah, we can do better than this. I feel that moving forward, Bandai could opt for having 1 egg that gives you draw power, and 1 that gives you DP buffs or debuffs. For the advanced Red Gaia starter deck, my suggestion would be to include reprint cards such as BT5 Koromon for drawing if your Digimon has Greymon or Omnimon in its name. And of course, the BT9 Koromon that gives you plus 1000 DP if you have Greymon in name. But what about level 3s? From the original Red starter deck, it was spread out amongst Agumon, Beomon, and Dracomon. But when you look at the old starter decks and compare them to the advanced ones, there's no cohesion that brings it all together. Though to be fair, this is predominantly because Digimon was just starting out, and there wasn't a crap ton of printings of specific named Digimon. True, the Beelzemon advanced starter deck does include Candlemon and Phascomon as other level 3s. But here, you can add the fact that the included reprints for this starter deck also include the old BT2 Impmon, and also 2 copies of EX2 Impmon as alternate art copies. Meaning in total, you have at least 8 Impmons viably in one deck. 12 total if you were to purchase just 2 advanced starter decks, though granted, EX2 Impmon is limited. So in a huge hypothetical, would it be necessarily bad to have cards like 2 copies of BT14 Agumon for the super rare slot, 4 copies of starter deck 7 for the DP buffs, and 4 copies of BT5 Agumon for searching? In total, this brings the total number of level 3s to 10. So what rounds out the remainder of the slots? It could probably be just 2 copies of Floodgates like Gaussmon and Gatsumon. This would in some ways prevent the Digivolution cost of Digimon from being cheaper, and your opponent from playing Digimon by effects. And when you would buy 2 of these advanced decks, you'd have a total of at minimum 4 copies of every level 3 for pure customization. Other options could be even Solarmon to have an on-play cost reduction to be minimized. But one reason why I went this particular route is mainly because by the end of this video, I'll not only showcase what I do for an advanced Red Gaia starter deck, but an advanced Blue Cocytus and advanced Heaven's Yellow as well. Traditionally though, when I've built Greymon cores, I usually opt to throw in 4 of everything. And to that end, I also tend to not include Floodgates because strategically Greymon decks would typically have the 4 BT12 Agumons for searching over the BT5 ones, and also the Agumon X's for the additional draw when you go on top of Agumon and another search. Again, I'll show a brief example of what a Greymon core looks like to my locals when I sell it to them. The number of level 4s in an advanced starter deck typically round out at 12, meaning 2 copies of the Security Attack +1 would be good to have, along with 4 copies of BT5 for that extra DP and memory gain. But because Red Gaia typically keeps the deck usually one color, you'd probably be mixing elements of 4 Greymon X's for the protection factor, then 2 from BT3 as security interactions. But again, with my cores, I typically opt for 4 BT5, 4 starter deck, 4 Greymon X from BT9, 1 from BT11, and of course the 4 Greymons from BT12. With the level 5s, you typically see 8 total in the advanced starter deck. And again for this one, I'd like to go 2 from EX1, 2 Alterous modes for the promos, 2 Blast modes for cheapness, and 2 Metal Greymon X's. Because again, with 2 advanced starter decks being purchased, you get your playset. But in a normal core for me, the BT12 variant, Metal Greymon X from BT9 and BT12 are normally what is most readily available, as promos have a pretty limited supply. Up to this point, the starter deck has consumed the normal 4, 14, 12, and 8 slots total of an advanced starter deck, being 38 out of 54 cards. This leaves roughly 16 cards remaining to be picked, with 6 slots automatically reserved for the level 6s, 2 for Tamers, and at least 6 cards for option cards. Which means for an advanced starter deck, you'd probably go 2 BT1 War Greymons for the option card negation, 2 from BT14 for the Warp Digivolve, and 2 from EX1 just to keep with the tradition of builds being mono red. But with the inclusion of black variants, you definitely want at least 2 from BT12. Tamers could be as simple as 2 red BT1 Taikamias and 2 from BT14. Though again, when mixing up the colors, you definitely opt for the 2 from BT12 instead, because gifting blocker to your Greymon Digimon can be really good value. Option card wise, I think that you're likely to bump into 8 option cards mainly because there's so much you could do. 2 Gaia Force for the signature attack of War Greymon, but then consistency floaters like 4 red memory boosts and 2 offense trainings fill out the rest. Offense training getting another reprint here in my mind. But when building my version of the core, I'd offer way more along with the Blitz Omnimons. Ultimately, I think my issue with starter decks as a product right now is that unless they're advanced starter decks, the structure of the deck itself largely comes off as a hodgepodge of different cards that don't necessarily fit together. Even the most recent starter decks like War Greymon Ace and Metal Garurumon Ace don't necessarily see cohesiveness when played as a stock deck right out of the box. But advanced ones, I'm definitely happy with. But when it comes to Blue Cocytus or Heaven's Yellow, the fact is that these decks would have very similar configurations to the advanced Red Gaia I pretty much made up as a core, but as a mono color, utilizing the same elements of the option cards, memory boosts, and trainings, and more so along with the floodgates. Now, I'm not saying that I want to see these exact products. Far from it. I think Bandai is slowly moving away from Adventure and Adventure 2 at least for the time being. Personally, I want to see more advanced starter decks because of the inherent value they bring, along with giving consumers the feeling that the deck doesn't go to waste and provides you a lot of support with even a single starter deck purchase. This video is mostly inspired by the fact that I have been building a lot of cores lately in order to downsize on the amount of bulk I have, and in doing so, I wanted to explain my logic on how to build cores should you do the same. With that in mind, do you think Bandai should do away with the non-advanced starter decks and strictly make advanced ones, to reuse current old cards and supplement them with additional new ones? And if you do like advanced starter decks, what would you like to ideally see next? With the fact that Tamers related Digimon have gotten the most out of the starter decks so far, ideally I think it would be most appropriate for Bandai to release 2 advanced starter decks centered around Renamon and Monodramon, with the themes of Rika and Rio as Queen and King. But until then, Check out my thoughts next week on what I would love to see for another perfect product that Bandai could release into the Digimon trading card game. This is DIGI-PANDA, logging out.